Welcome to Chapter 12, Managing Organizational Change. So if you are a manager at an organization, you better hope you're changing and evolving and learning and growing, because if you're not, then you're in decline and you're shrinking and your market value is probably going down. So one of the things that you need to always be mindful of is, if you are a manager, you have to help the organization change and grow. So for this chapter, we're going to understand what organizational change is, how it relates to the internal and external environment, explain some common models of organizational change. You should understand how organizational change relates to organizational culture, and explain the relationship between entrepreneurship, innovation, and organizational change. And finally, describe the challenges managers face in mapping organizational change in a unionized workplace. Let's jump in. Okay, so this is an overview of a number of concepts we're going to cover in this section. The farthest column to the left, the nature of organizational change, we have four types of change: structural change, technological change, strategic change, and cultural change. We're going to go into all of those in more detail later in this chapter. Then we have the steps in managing organizational change, models of organizational change, Lewin's three-stage model, Kotter's 8-step plan, the 4Ds of apprehensive inquiry, and then complexity theory. Organizational change and culture, we're going to talk about adaptive cultures, we're going to talk about inert cultures, and then finally, for the final learning outcome, innovation, entrepreneurship, and organizational change. We're going to talk about product champions, skunkworks, rewarding innovation, and organizational change in a unionized environment. Okay, so first of all, what is organizational change? Organizational change is movement in an organization away from its present state towards a desired future outcome, and hopefully that increases both efficiency and effectiveness. What do you have to do? You have to alter your policies, structures, behaviors, and beliefs in order to move forward. And implementing change is often met with resistance because, listen, people get comfortable in their job, they learn how to do it. The last thing they want to do is to continually have to redo what they've learned. And listen, change is painful. Growth is uncomfortable. People don't like it. So implementing it can often come with some resistance. And change agents are people who take responsibility for managing change. Those are the people that you want in your organization. You want a number of people who are change agents. Organizational change and culture. There's two ways for organizational change to come about. One is induced change, and that's planned new institutional arrangements and policies made to gain a competitive edge. An example, mergers and acquisitions, when companies combine, that's an induced change. And then another one is an imposed change, and that is when new institutional arrangements are made to comply with regulations. An example they give in this slide is when all the restaurants became non-smoking, they had to change all their policies and remove the smoking areas and enforce this new law. So, as we talked about in the earlier slide, there are four types of organizational change. Structural change is any change in the design and management of the organization. Technological change occurs when organizational processes and methods are redesigned to be more efficient. Strategic change occurs when new ideas developed, innovation occurs, a change in products and services. And finally, cultural change is shifts in shared sets of beliefs, expectations, values, norms, and work routines. So four different types, distinct types of organizational change. Here it is in a diagram. You can see the four types of change outlined in the various colors: the green, the purple, the blue, and brown. And then in the middle, as the manager, you have to manage these changes through planning, leading, organizing, and then controlling. So steps in managing organizational change. First of all, you have to assess the need for change. Recognize that there's a problem and identify the source of the problem. After the assessment, you move to the decision stage. Make a decision on the type of change you're going to make and what does your ideal future look like. Identify any obstacles that may be in the way. And then the toughest one here is the implementation of that change. Decide whether change will occur from the top down or from the bottom up, and introduce and manage change. And then the last step is, once that change has occurred, you need to evaluate it. Compare the pre-change performance to post-change performance and use some benchmarks and try to figure out, okay, this is where we started, this is where we want to go. Have we made it? Are we achieving the benchmarks that we set out to achieve? Assessing the need for change. So this was the first step in making the change. And so you need to recognize that there's a problem, identify maybe the source of the problem. These are the two initial activities you have to take. And then there's something called a performance gap, and that's really the disparity between where you want to be and where you are, right? You want to do a certain number of sales every quarter, or you want to capture a certain market. Have you done that? Where's the gap between where you want to be and what you have set out to do? Deciding on the change to make. So once the source of the problem has been identified, managers must decide on the ideal future. Important to identify obstacles and sources of resistance, and those are found at all levels of the organization, making organizational change, real change, a very slow process because you have to get everybody on board. So introducing change, there's two ways that managers can introduce change. One is top-down, other one is bottom-up. So a top-down type of change is implemented quickly. And they do that from the top managers. They identify the need and they send out a memo and say, this is the way that things are going to be from now on. And they emphasize on making changes quickly in dealing with problems that, as they arise. Bottom up is different. It's typically more gradual. It involves managers and employees at all levels of the organization. It reduces a lot of uncertainty and resistance to change because you get to everyone together. You say, listen, we need to capture more market share. And in order for that to happen, we're interested in hearing what your thoughts are. What strategies do you want to implement? What policies and procedures should we amend? And it's bottom up. The organization creates the change as opposed to one person or a group of small people sitting around a desk saying, I think we should change the organization. Let's send out a memo, have a meeting, or make an announcement. Where the bottom up change involves all stakeholders in the organization. And you can understand why that would be a lot less resistance, right? Because everyone gets on board early in the process. Evaluating change. So how successful was the change effort in improving the performance? Use things as market share, profits, benchmarking, comparing the performance on specific dimensions within the performance of a high-performing organization to determine, assess change of effort, right? So you have to benchmark where you started, where you are now. Is it working? Organizational control and change. So need to improve on one side, you have the need to respond to events on the other, and in the balance in the middle, you have managers who must balance the needs of an organization to improve the way it currently operates with the need for change, right? And unanticipated events. You don't want to change everything all at once because it's going to throw this balance off. But then again, you always need to be changing and adapting in order to survive in these globally competitive markets. So it's the manager, as always, in the middle trying to strike that balance. What is Lewin's three-stage model of change? So it is managing change in a three-step process. The first thing you got to do is unfreeze the status quo, right? The way things are, you have to break that up. There's three ways that can happen. Driving forces, direct behavior away from the status quo. And status quo is just the way things have always been done. Restraining forces, hinder movement from existing equilibrium, can be decreased. And then a combination of the first few points. So you're trying to direct behavior, and then you're also trying to remove any obstacles that are going to hinder the performance. Then you move to the new state, and then you refreeze that change and make it permanent. So the unfreeze, the moving, and then you freeze again, and hopefully you lock in a new policy, procedure, outlook, technology that's going to help you move forward and be more competitive in a world that's always changing. So here's Lewin's model, a schematic of it. You can see at the bottom we have the driving forces as they move up in those arrows, and then we have the restraining forces on the top, and you're kind of trying to break through them to get to the next outcome. So you have the current condition, and those driving forces are always having to break through the next level of resistance before you get to any type of real change. The idea that things are frozen and you must break through that resistance to get to the new stage in the organization. Models of organizational change. People resist change for two reasons. The first one is fear. You know, they don't know what the new job's going to entail. Maybe it's going to be way more work and things are going to be inefficient. I'm going to hate my job, so I'm afraid of that. And the second one is doubt. People doubt that the changes that you're suggesting are really legitimate. Are they really going to make any difference? How can managers break this resistance? Well, there's a few ways outlined here. The first one is clearly communicate future state and seek input, increase driving forces, remove any of those restraining forces. When resistance is extremely high, use both driving forces and restraining forces for unfreezing, and then use formal power to withhold rewards. That's the last, the last kind of tactic you should use. But if all else fails, you can say people that are willing to make this change and come in and do the additional training we need to do, I'm going to pay you a bit more. Maybe I'll give you a bit more vacation time. Maybe I'll let you pick where in the office you want to work or what days you need to come in, right? You need to maybe reward people for going through the effort of making that change. So here's Kotter's 8-step plan in implementing change. I'm going to give you a brief overview here, but please make sure you spend more time in your textbook reading through it in more detail, because simply going through the slide is not going to help you grasp the depth of which Kotter's model goes into in creating change in an institution. So the first step, and these are all the 4 unfreezing steps, you have to establish a sense of urgency by creating a compelling reason. Why do we need to change, right? That's step number 1. Form a coalition of people that are willing to change is step 2. Step 3 is create a new vision to direct change and strategies for achieving that vision. And then step 4 is communicating the vision through the organization. Hopefully those 4 steps lead to the unfreezing of the way things are done currently. And then you have the moving process, and that's when you have to empower people to act. You have to plan, create reward, short-term wins, and then you consolidate those improvements and reassess any changes before moving to the last stage, which is that reinforcement and the refreezing stage where you've successfully made those changes and now you want to ingrain them in the organization so things don't go backwards to the way things used to be. The 4 Ds of apprehensive inquiry. So we have discovery, dreaming, design, and destiny. Sorry for the little pause there. Having some connection issues, but that's okay. So discovery is identify what is good about their jobs, what the strengths and organizations are, and the positive aspects of their group. So that whole discovery stage. The dreaming stage is next. Employees envision possible futures for the organization. Then they're going to design. Members develop a common vision for what qualities the organization will have and how it will be structured. And then destiny is finally participants discuss how to implement the dream and design, write the action, and implement the plans. The 4 Ds. So here is just a schematic of what we just went over. Discovery is determining the best of what is. Dreaming, visualizing what might be. Design, developing what should be, and implementing what will be. It can be inspiring stuff, right? Changing an organization. Complexity theory. So organizations respond best to fundamental change if they are on the edge of chaos. To achieve this state, managers must increase channels of communication, not dictate agendas, rotate people regularly, avoid over-reliance on any incumbent management team, tolerate parallel developments, avoid excessive fits, and try to avoid anxiety. Adaptive cultures versus inert cultures. So adaptive cultures encourage positive attitudes and behaviors, foster creativity. An example is WestJet, 3M. These are very adaptive cultures. Inert cultures, these are ones that lead to values and norms that fail to motivate and inspire people. They don't really want to change much, and it leads to stagnation. And eventually, if you're stagnating as an organization, you're going to fail over time. Innovation, entrepreneurship, and organizational change. So organizations need to provide a culture of innovation and implementation to create ideas in an organization. So what are entrepreneurs? They notice opportunities and take responsibility for mobilizing resources necessary to produce new goods and services. Social innovation, finding new ways to solve social problems. And entrepreneurs are employees who notice opportunities or products or service improvements and are responsible for managing the development process. So the process of innovation, we have a product champion, takes ownership of a new idea, that moves to skunkworks, and that's top level managers sponsor and support the development of new products, which those things will lead to innovation, and that's implementation of creative ideas in an organization, including rewards for entrepreneurs. So product champion is a manager who takes ownership of a product and provides leadership to take action, right? This idea that we talked about before, that maybe you have teams, right? That are task force that get together to maybe product or champion a product. Skunkworks are great entrepreneurs that deliberately separated from normal operations to encourage development of new ideas. And rewarding innovation, necessary to link performance to rewards. We've talked about this. If you're going to go through the hard work of making a change in an organization, people should be rewarded. And companies often reward entrepreneurs on outcome of product and development process, right? If they achieve the goal, they should be rewarded. Managing change in unionized environments. So when you're dealing with unions, you have to be careful, right? Because they have certain rights and privileges that they fought for, so you need to respect those. So there's 4 essential elements to managing change in a unionized environment. The first one is an effective system for resolving day-to-day issues, a jointly administered business education process, a jointly developed strategic vision. See how these are jointly, right? They're working with the employees, a non-traditional problem-solving method of negotiating and collective agreements. Don't think outside the box. Think like there is no box. Okay, and finally, the summary. So, organizational change is a movement of an organization away from its present state towards some desired future, right? Like, what do you want to achieve? How can we increase efficiency and effectiveness? When organizational change is either induced from the inside an organization or imposed from the outside, changes in technology, structure, strategic, and organizational culture affect the management process of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Steps in managing organizational change. There's 4 steps that we went over in managing those changes. The need for change, deciding on the change to make, introducing the change, evaluating how successful the change is. We talked about Kurt's Luden suggestion, the 3-step model, the status quo being unfrozen, the movement to the new state, and then the refreezing to make it permanent. We talked about Kotter's 8-step process of change. And we talked about the complexity theory that suggests that to be effectively deal with change, managers must create flexible systems that teeter on the edge of chaos, but they're not too permanent either, right? This idea where you need a balance between the both. And then finally, adaptive organizational cultures are better able to embrace change than inert ones because of the positive attitudes, and people are knowing that they're getting into an organization that has a lot of momentum and energy. And the unionized, the unionized environment, we talked a little bit about innovation in the implementation and creative ideas within an organization. Employees are more motivated to initiate change and innovate when the organizational culture is supportive and flexible, of course. When they feel like if they're going to make a mistake, they're not going to be yelled at, but supported, they're more willing to take risks. Managers can promote innovation by creating product champions, creating skunk works, rewarding employees, and taking risks. The management change in a unionized environment, it is so important because this has to be the collective decision making, right? The cooperative problem solving. You have to involve the stakeholders in order to make change in a unionized environment. High performance culture based on norms and values that support innovation and risk taking is better in an adaptive change. Okay, so that is a brief overview of organizational change and managing change as a leader. I would encourage you to read more detail in your textbook. And as always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out and ask.